Welcome back to On the Soul's Terms podcast. And I'm joined today by Dr. Travis Elliott. Travis, welcome back to the show, or welcome to the show.
Thank you, Chris. Yes, it's nice to be back in your company, do the show for the first time.
Yeah, it feels like you're back on the show because, well, Travis and I met in Santa Fe at the Living Astrology's conference. This conference was incredible, the first of its kind. You know, it really was living, wasn't it? It was astrology coming from the earth and up rather than from the heavens and down. And Travis and I actually connected because of my workshop there, which was around Cinderella. And one of the things in Cinderella was the hazel bush. And a big process kind of opened up around the hazel bush, which is not growing native to Santa Fe. So we went on a whole journey and ended up coming back to the hazel bush. As it turned out, a woman sat in front of Mother's grave in the room whose grandmother's name was Hazel Winter. I believe her name was Holly Hazel Winter. I'm pretty sure that was right. At least I know that the second name was Hazel.
The grandmother's
name, who she says is always with her and always sitting over her right shoulder, and over the right shoulder was Mother's grave. So that gives you a bit of a glimpse into just how the workshops were and the living astrologies lived us and lived through us. But I bring Travis on today for a lot of reasons, actually. But the essence of this podcast is astrologically on the cusp of the 8th and the 9th house. And we've had some episodes before where we've spent some time really hanging out on cusps. But there's no cusp quite like this one, I think, where we are between the 8th house of death and deep processes and grief and loss and intimacy and shared resources, shared experiences. We're going into this underworld place of the 8th, and the 9th house is higher learning, higher education, that sort of eagle-eyed view, the mountaintop, the crisp kind of view, and like a house where we get the feeling of that fire that goes into the Sagittarian fire, the third fire of rebirth, into what could be considered the possibilities of wisdom, the mind of God. So we have these two houses next to each other, the 8th and the 9th, associated the 8th with Scorpio and the 9th with Sagittarius. And in the constellations themselves, in between Scorpio and Sagittarius, as I've talked about before on the show, is Ophiuchus. And Ophiuchus is representative of Asclepius, the dream healer of ancient Greece, who has come up many times in the show. And so Travis and I, while getting together and having a meal or two in Santa Fe, talked quite extensively about what it would be like to spend some time at that cusp together on the podcast. So that's what we're going to do. But before we start into that, Travis, can you tell us a bit about like why it would be that you in particular would be the guest for this cusp?
Yes, I'd love to. Yeah, as we step on that border, we crisscross that border today into the 9th house of the joy of the sun too, and that kind of cohering element. I'll step into that sun for a second and see if I can cohere.
Please, yeah.
It's been a long spiraling journey with lots of stages into the essence of what's really important, today for our conversation. And I am a physician, a naturopathic physician. It's important to qualify. And in the United States, in certain of the states, I'm licensed as a physician on the same kind of legal par as MDs or regular doctors. But we do have this different training in that we learn how the body works and how the body breaks down, but then a much wider variety of exploration of how to work with disease in the body. And in the mode of Asclepius, a lot of that is about pattern recognition and fixing. So really kind of recognizing symptoms, trying to understand the mechanics of how the body works, and then matching treatment to it. So whether you're using a pharmaceutical or or herbs, that's often how it happens, and that's the tradition. And I've always been really interested in like really getting into the underlying understanding of disease, especially chronic disease, and especially diseases that aren't well understood or treated by the more standard medical models. So autoimmune disease, for example, is something I've worked a lot with, and went through periods of really wanting to better understand emotional parts of disease too, but it's kind of difficult to weave that in sometimes. And so I found myself in a functional medicine practice, which is very kind of moving from the eighth up into the ninth house, as we'll be discussing, of really trying to sit back and say, of all these things happening in the body, here's what I see is wrong in these different systems. And here are some things that I think, some supplements, some dietary strategies, all these things imposed from the outside saying, this is what I think you should do. And the problem with that for me is the body is so complex and overwhelmingly complicated, and has this kind of like dark, mysterious side that we never will understand, that allows us to go through a lot of self-healing. We have this self-healing power, and we're not just a complicated car. We're a living, breathing consciousness, that's connected to other consciousnesses around us. And so in that place, feeling kind of overwhelmed, as people would come in, patients would come in and look to me as kind of, I thought of it at the time and still do, like a kind of a god saying, like, I'm giving you all the power. You tell me what to do.
Wow.
It was a lot of responsibility, especially in that place of knowing that there's a lot that I don't know. Mm-hmm. And also not really being able to truly meet them in a place of real individuality, and their symptoms and their emotions, which is part of the body, and knowing that there must be a way of helping them move through a place of more transformation instead of just fixing, but not really knowing how to do it. I knew that I needed a change, and so I paused, and into that space kind of randomly came in a technique that allowed me over a period of about 10 years to be more intuitive in my practice with people. And I won't go into the specific details of how all that happened, but a technique that allowed me to sit with somebody and really kind of, instead of recognizing a pattern and going in and saying, this is what you should do, instead developing my own intuition and accessing the patient's own intuition and being able to ask questions and receiving information in kind of a yes/no way of, oh, here's the priority, not here's everything that's wrong, but here's the thing that is really essential for us to do right now. And in that process, I thought I was going to be delineating all these like complicated treatment plans. You do this diet, take these 6 supplements and these herbs. But very, very quickly, things got very simple and narrowed down. And the process started really building my own intuitive sense, kind of like my subtle sense of, somebody might develop a subtle sense of touch. A surgeon, for example, if they do something over and over again. And I started seeing kind of images, getting a felt sense of what the priority was, kind of a visual pattern that at first I didn't really know what to do with, but then as it started happening more and more and the sort of sharing it with people in the context of our discussion, realized that, oh, this is an image that's kind of coming from them. This is the priority that's coming from them that then I can share back as a way of using their symptoms to describe in a little more detailed way, here's a priority. Eventually, that kind of got stronger and stronger. I started working with some plants and a particular plant preparations that are kind of alchemical and prepared in a way that very much fits the arc of these stories you've been telling on the podcast, Chris. that led me into astrology, because they're spagyric, they're alchemically prepared plants that are prepared in accordance with astrological timing. And I had been looking to nature through this process for understanding more of what was happening inside the human body, and realized, oh, well, perhaps understanding nature a little bit farther out, like the celestial patterns, could also help inform. And it's just been an amazing journey. And in that, I started working with Jason Hawley, and he mentioned Asclepius one day, this mentor group that I'm a part of and have been for the last 3 years. And he described the Asclepian dream chamber, the variant of the story, the part of the story that most of us know, of lying on the ground with non-venomous snakes and receiving a dream. And then Melanie Reinhardt talked about the dream doing the work, but often talked about that there is a telling of the dream to Asclepiad, or a priest or a priestess of the Asclepian temple, and getting some assistance in interpreting that. And I think it's probably a combination of both, and even receiving, let's say, an herbal prescription. And I thought in that moment, like, oh, wow, that's really similar to what I have stumbled onto after 20 years of practice, of sitting with somebody, essentially receiving this image. And in that intuitive process that sort of evolved, instead of all these other medicines that I'd been using and trained in for years, it was mainly plants coming in, plant tinctures, especially these spagyric plants, in a way that, again, wasn't prescription, pattern recognition from the outside, but kind of coming in through a resonance with my patient or my client in that moment. So that turned me on to this idea of Asclepius, and this idea that, oh, there's this connection to nature, there's this connection to earth that is coming up through the person in front of me, and that is informing us about parts of them that need support. And then through just astrological study and taking some classes from Demetra George and the whole, the asteroid phenomenon, I discovered that there are two Asclepius asteroids. One's named Asclepia, one's named Asculapia, which is a Latin term for maybe an Asclepion. And that one of them is conjunct my sun, and the other one is conjunct my Chiron. And so that sort of raised my interest a little bit more, and really trying to understand that, and really leaning into this idea that, oh, there's this dreaming part of it. And through work with friends and talking about this more, I realized in the consult with people, I need to stop just giving information, saying, here's the information, here's this image, and here's some plants. And instead, somebody asked me a question, a friend said, well, are you allowing your patient to also dream it in their own body? And so that's been a process of, in the consult, instead of sharing face to face just information, but really kind of going back into the feeling of symptoms and sensations in the body related to the dream, you could say, that receiving this intuitive image, and out of that gaining kind of spontaneous creative composting and digesting of, whether it's like a physical symptom with detox and autoimmune disease attacking the thyroid, or digestive issues, but also folded into it is emotional digesting and composting, and often a deeper meaning out of what their disease process has been, as opposed to just, oh, here's the pattern, we need to fix it, and try and get you back to where you want it to be. And so I hope that makes sense, but it's that, Chiron, Sun, Asclepius combination in the, 7th house, 8th house, for me has been incredibly fruitful, and given me a different way of understanding our ability of connecting with ourselves, relating to ourselves, and nature, Mother Earth, Gaia. And one of the really cool things that I found out about that is, in that process, it's not just that people feel better symptom-wise, and that is why I do this, because it actually works better for me, quote, works better, than anything else that I'd tried, really kind of sharing the power between us. In that process, I realized they're connecting more deeply to themselves, and they're gaining a stronger sense of intuition. So then they are not only perhaps composting and digesting their condition, their disease, and feeling better, but also have a stronger sense of, okay, what else do I need, besides what I'm doing with them? I don't have this comprehensive medical practice. I'm not giving them everything they need for their health. But suddenly, instead of me telling people, oh, you need to change your diet, they would, after a couple months, say, actually, I think I need to change my diet and do some changes, like with sugar or dairy, that maybe they'd known they should do for a long time, but never really could get around to it. So that is my connection with Asclepius in terms of my healthcare practice. And then in the astrology world, my friend Margot Crump and I had connected because we wanted to do a living astrology workshop around plants. I developed this deep relationship with plants, and she already had, and we connected through the Holly group. We wanted to do a plant communication astrology workshop. As we got together and we were looking at our astrology, I noticed, oh, she had the same Asclepius Sun conjunction that I did. And that led us on a whole journey of, she taught me how to kind of more imaginatively journey into the myth and into the connections with plants. Margot's an amazing artist and astrologer and tarot card reader and teacher, based out of Houston. She had this experience of kind of like you did in your episode, or you talked about in your episode of Libby Rose Wade, and how Libby went into the Persephone story. We decided, okay, let's do that with the Asclepius story. And in that process, reimagined this whole connection that Asclepius had with his mother that was very fractured, and in the myth sense, kind of and human sense, kind of traumatic, and going into those dynamics and really kind of then diving back into the original sources of the Asclepius myth. Realized there's some dynamics here that I felt and we felt have propelled us into the kind of medical place where we are today with, that Asclepius is the foundation of our Western medical system. And our Western medical system is, the doctors are the new gods. And so diving into that in a more reimagining and kind of research way has really kind of then informed my practice even deeper in terms of, okay, how can we perhaps bring some more wholeness to our healthcare, not medical, but how can we bring more wholeness to our healthcare?
Well, there's already a lot here. I'm just sitting with all of the things. I mean, it's so good for starters just to hear your story told in this way, because although we've had many conversations and we sort of jumped in the middle, without necessarily getting the origin. And it's good to hear that story, for the first time and feel the presence of Asclepius within it and feel the journeying going on, in a sense. Maybe the movement in between 8th and 9th, or even 7th, 8th, 9th houses that is going on in the midst of it. And I wonder, the healthcare system is such a trigger topic in its most basic level, right? And this is such a rich, imaginative way to look at all of these things. And yet, certainly the dominant paradigm in the places that we're from, like the United States and Australia, the dominant paradigm there in the modern context is that you do go to the doctor to say, here's my problem and what can you do to fix it? And the doctors really, this is one element of what you're talking about is Asclepian in the sense of a demigod, because this is the demigod physician that's ultimately coming down from on high with a knowledge, with a knowing of exactly what needs to happen. And the expectation of that must be so intense. And I think it's just it feels to me when you describe it to be such an intense burden to know something that is partially knowable. Like
Hmm.
expected to know something that's partially knowable is like, I mean, that's got to cause stomach ulcers. And I mean, just, the amount of pressure that I feel, even just like experiencing that, to have somebody come to you. I think even more so is like the psychiatrist level of medical doctors. It's like, well, here's the things that is going on in my mind.
Hmm.
And then the psychiatrist is like, okay, got it. Well, here's your diagnosis. And, doing that in
Hmm.
15 minutes or maybe an hour, definitely not an hour these days. It's like,
Yeah. Oh.
get the diagnosis, get the fix for that, and then off you go back into your world. And what you're talking about is, this whole concept of the new and the ancient, like, feels new and revolutionary, but hearkening back to a deep remembering of an ancient form of maybe what we've always known medicine to be. There was something in the Asclepian myth when I was looking into it, because Brian Clark gave me a few volumes of the actual tablets that were left behind of the healings that had happened, which is a remarkable, someone had gathered them all up and put them in a book. But there's a big preamble in that book, a big introduction, and in it I was reading about this very controversial time when Asclepius begins to charge money for medicine,
Hmm.
and the kind of uproar about that this god should do that, and the controversy around that, even mythically, that would happen. And then again, just like rinse and repeat and replicate for hundreds or thousands of years. And we get to where we are now, because one of the big components of this is like, who has the time for all of this on the one hand, and then who has the money for all of this on the other, right? Like time and money become this kind of chronological thing that sits over the top of it. And so I'm actually drawn to such like a practical level while I'm listening, of like, I feel like the voice of that is coming through me, but like, here's my thing, and it's making me very sick, and it's very concerning, and it could kill me perhaps, and I just need a solution to that.
Hmm.
And it's like we've been trained into come to the doctor with that kind of energy, and I wonder what the doctor does in response to that, and because it really does feel like the big component of this, as I hear it, is the paradigm component of a paradigm of medicine, and the current dominant paradigm of it not fitting into the thing that you're talking about, even though the thing that you're talking about feels so real and true. I feel it in my bones, and I practice this kind of thing through process-oriented psychotherapy. It's a similar thing. So dropping into the dreaming of the body symptoms is a huge part of the psychotherapeutic of
And your
process work.
dynamic craniosacral too. I mean,
Mm.
your description of that, of finding the still point. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're not going in, putting your hands on somebody and working with those tides, those deep tides in their body, and trying to change them. You're accessing some point of stillness and then allowing them to change. Am I right?
Yeah, I mean, you're as you say, you're accessing a still point, or you're accessing the body just as it is, I would say, first off, and certainly
Mm-hmm.
cultivating a stillness inside of yourself so that you're not sort of swayed by what's going on. But one of the biggest ways that you would
Mm-hmm.
get swayed is that you want to become the fixer or the healer of this person, and that's the biggest bias that
Right.
you could have when you're putting your hands on somebody, because you actually need to cultivate the awareness of, I don't know what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And whatever it
Mm-hmm.
is, once it reveals itself to me, the last thing I want to do is say that I want to fix that. So, and because biodynamic is just that, it believes in the dynamism of the bio, the body, and that it has
Mm-hmm.
within itself everything that it needs. Um,
Right.
and so then you come in with that approach, and you have the body have someone heal it. I mean, hear it, not heal it, hear it with that way. But that's an interesting little flip. To hear it with an ear that's saying like, I get you, I see what you're doing, and I'm supporting. I'm going to go with what you have in mind, rather than I'm going to go antibiotic, right? I'm going to go anti what you have in mind. And I'm going to go with what we have in mind, was what health looks like and feels like and should be like, and how your body should be acting. And
And
yeah, biodynamic craniosacral goes, other way, which is why I was so drawn to it 20 something years ago when I first kind of like put my hands on someone. I was like, oh my God, this stuff is amazing. I can't explain it. You know,
Yeah,
I don't know why this works. Yeah.
that framing is exactly the framing that I've sort of stumbled into in my own practice, and what the structure that has evolved that is really allowing a deep hearing and deep listening to the body, but not just a listening on my end. It's really building that listening skill in my clients. And by the way, as I've shifted my own practice, you know, I've had to step out of, I'm not in the medical model anymore. And, you know, my website had to drop the doctor part because I'm not prescribing and diagnosing. And I think about, they used to be patients and now they're clients, you know, a legal line. And I was thinking about that today, and I looked up the etymology for the first time, and patient really is a very specifically medical term. You know, I mean, there's obviously the other meanings of the word patient, but patient as a noun is came from the French for medicine, and it essentially is somebody who is undergoing something, suffering something that is being done to them. So there's this patient, the word patient inherent is I am having something done to me, which I thought was quite remarkable. And what you're talking about, and this the skills, and it's in a way it's bringing in the yin to what is a very yang kind of medicine, outward action, and instead bringing this kind of like deeply feminine inward listening. That I don't think, to your question before, you know, doctors have a really essential place. You know, medicine has an essential place, and yes, we want doctors to listen. And there's lots of fractures and stress and burnout in medicine, specifically because of what you're talking about. That there's so much pressure put on, both time pressure and expectation pressure. You tell me what's going on. And what I imagine is that it's not that the medicine necessarily has to change to incorporate everything we're talking about, but that this inner ability to just sit and listen to our own bodies and our own emotions and our own symptoms and sensations is a much more mundane, like everyday I'm human skill that is connected back to the feminine roots of herbalism and medicine that was, you know, it was done in the home. It was done on, you didn't have to go anywhere. To me, that's one of my sort of missions. And one thing that I'm really excited about is bringing healthcare, not out of the medical world, but adding to it in a way that teaches people how to relate to their own sense of self, as opposed to getting that sense of self away to some perceived power. And in the Asclepius story, there is an interesting, like, I don't know how it happened, but there is this, you know, there's what Melanie was saying again of lying on the ground and the dream creating this connection to earth and connection to the underworld through snakes, bringing healing. And then by the time the Asclepia became sort of the Greek medical system, and there's this patriarchal lineage, which you've referred to in the past, and the money changing hands, they had moved away from the dream doing the work. And instead, you know, I found an article in an osteopathic journal going deeply into what those Asclepiads did in these healing temples. And there was all this languaging around purification, and this languaging around like yes, they're going to lie on the ground, but it's really this exclusive knowledge that these Asclepiads, these priests of the Asclepia had, that they were trained in, their knowledge that was really doing the work. People would come in, and it had at some point became a kind of pattern recognition state of, okay, go through this purification with the diet and do these exercises and do this food and just lie down on the ground. You know, in this particular article and the research they had done, at some point there's a switch where that body wisdom or earth wisdom drops out, and then there's no turning back.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's an interesting one. So we bring up the myth.
Mm-hmm.
And something we talked about in Santa Fe is that Asclepius is born in Thessaly,
Mm-hmm.
or he's from Thessaly, and Thessaly is the ancient area of the witches, essentially,
Mm-hmm.
of the ancient feminine knowing, to put it
Mm-hmm.
another way. And so then we come into this Coronis figure who's obviously shown up deep into your dreaming, into the myth itself.
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe we can feel our way into that as we look at this transition, because you're referencing an ancient transition, and ancient transitions is sometimes hard to track, and sometimes the best way to track them is to sense it through the myths and the changing myths.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes a myth can come from that time that really does describe the transition, or the transitional point, or the inflection point at which it moves from one to the other. And I think this is what you were tracking and tracing through your dreaming into this myth here.
Mm-hmm. Asclepius, born the son of Coronis, who, as you referenced, lived in Thessaly. And there isn't a lot of detail about their relationship, but Coronis, Asclepius' father, is Apollo. And somehow Apollo made love to Coronis. She became pregnant with Asclepius, but then chose, instead of staying, quote, faithful or sort of in the relationship with Apollo, went back home and married another mortal man named Ischus. And the next thing that happened in the story was that a crow, a white crow, flew to Apollo and told him about it. And he became enraged, and in his anger, smoted the white crow, turning it black, and then killed Coronis. Some variants are he shot her with her arrows, others that he sent his sister Artemis to kill her. But either way, she was killed for her betrayal and or her choosing of Ischus. And it's interesting that that name, the etymology or the definition of his name is strength, kind of like fulfilling of characters. She chose strength. The other part is that her name is, one of the meanings of her name is crow too. So there are these little threads in the story that we can sit with. But what we know happened was that her body was put on a funeral pyre and was burning. And then in the process of burning, Apollo realized that his son was inside of her still. And so cut her out, or cut him out, cut her open. And Asclepius was birthed in that. It might be the first cesarean section. And another variant says that Hermes came in and brought Asclepius out of the womb. But either way, he was pulled from the fire and sent to live with Chiron. And my friend Margot and I had read a little bit about that, but then we did that imaginative journeying experience described, and in that process, there was a door that we were going to walk through. And as we were about to walk through that door, I remember we had this sort of question, like, I think this has to do with Asclepius's mother, which we sort of tangentially read about. And then wondered, like, what was her name again? And neither of us could remember her name. And she said, I know we can't remember her name, and just that fact feels important. And in that process, it was sort of felt like a connection with the Asclepius archetype and this Coronis archetype that really is just a couple lines in the story and the myths, but fairly dramatic lines. And there was sort of a turning towards each other, this sort of like a reunification and an honoring of the mother role that Coronis had, even though she was killed and burned and was no longer part of his story. And we came out of that experience wondering, wanting to read more about the details of the myth, but also this wondering of, it felt like there was this kind of a wound in the story of this being extracted from the womb, from the mother, from Thessaly, and sent off to eventually found this, this whole system of medicine that we're talking about, through first a tutelage with Chiron, but all at the behest of Apollo, who is that, in many ways, this, a more recent or a modern, I don't know how you would phrase it, Chris, but a late arrival on the Greek god scene, and perhaps bridge into, connected with the sun and connected with purification and connected with an ascension tendency, kind of like pulling away from.
I mean, it's interesting because, Peter Kingsley writes a lot about this in his book, The Dark Places of Wisdom. He has many incredible works, but in The Dark Places of Wisdom, I particularly like, especially in terms of this conversation. And he does talk about a more ancient Apollo, maybe closer to the Helios kind of sun god, who's typically the sun, and even tracking the sun's journey, because when the sun goes over the sky and then sets in the Greek imagination, then it goes into a boat and is taken across the river ocean all the way back to the beginning. And that part where the sun is in the ocean is like the sun is in the underworld, and it's charging up with the potency and power by going across the river ocean. And then when it comes up and rises again, it's got all the potency, but that potency is ultimately womb-based or from the earth or from the ocean. That's where the true potency is and comes from. And so in the end, Asclepius's tradition follows that, actually. It follows the incubation and the getting taken down and the charging up from the earth levels. And there's an acknowledgement that when the sun is out, it's a sort of a draining experience, actually, compared to when the night world is there and there's that recharging. If we have our regular rhythms, then where are we getting the energy for the day? It's through the dreaming, right? And if we don't go to sleep, then we become more and more unraveled until we start just hallucinating, which is basically bringing the dreams into our day world to remind us that it's essential to dream. So there's something about dreaming as being an essential quality of health and wellness. So Apollo, in a more ancient sense, was actually in a relationship as the sun god to health. But then the Apollo that you're referring to, is more like your Pantheon Apollo, Nietzsche's Apollo, basically, the one that's all about order and opposed to, say, Dionysus, or juxtaposed with Dionysus or Dionysian processes of revelry and these kinds of things. He's about order. He's much more kind of like Athena-like in that sense, as an archetypal figure. And so, it makes sense here that just like Chiron also has a foster son relationship with Apollo as well. But Chiron maintains his horse body. So he maintains his earth body, and he maintains, therefore, animal consciousness. He never splits off from that, unlike the humans. He never splits off from that, so he's able to walk through the forest. I always picture him walking through the forest, talking to the plants, talking to the plant life, talking to the animals as well. And the animals and the trees are telling him, mix this with that, and that this cures this thing, and this helps this. And, all of that knowledge is coming from direct communication with the plants, that then later becomes, there's not such a direct communication anymore, direct communion. I think the same for Asclepius is like, there's a symbol here where, because Asclepius does actually learn from Chiron and essentially learns everything he knows and then adds the psyche to it, adds dreaming, you can get a sense of him having all of those different, like a big range of medicine, and still a connection to his Thessaly spirit as far as the soul of the mother is still there inside of him. But as you say, the mother is also backgrounded. And then we have the Asclepiads, and we have generation after generation, father to son, which is interesting, as you were referring to before, passed down father to son. So the mother is definitely being cut out, or he's being cut out of the mother. And then I think it's like something like 17 generations later that Hippocrates comes along. So many, many generations go by before we get to Hippocrates. And then Hippocrates is famously good at categorizing, right, ultimately. So then the Hippocratic medicine splits off from the Asclepian medicine, right? Like, in a way, even though Hippocrates is an Asclepiad, and even though Asclepius is born from the crone, Coronis and the crone, and a figure that definitely represents like a dark moon wisdom. I've always seen that moment where Coronis and Apollo get together as an eclipse moment, because the dark moon and the sun have like kind of collided with each other and formed Asclepius in a way. And then as we go further and further away from that, we get more and more forgetful of where did this come from? What are its roots? And that's what I'm really curious about, of the roots of the Western medical model, you know, the roots of that. And the roots do go back to this.
They do. And I'm curious about that too. And there are, you know, especially I'm curious how you think about this, and if there are pieces of the myth that I'm missing around Asclepius's relationship to death. And my more deeper understanding through the alchemical process of the plants that I work with, and just, you know, the idea of a plant seasonal cycle of really honoring the process of death, and not just the end of a life, but even just, you know, if we're talking about transformation, alchemical transformation, and becoming, you know, more whole and related to oneself, sometimes that often requires the death of, you know, different assumptions or beliefs or structures. You know, back to autoimmune disease, if I have an immune system attacking myself, and I want that healed in some way, then there needs to be some kind of death of that T cell memory that thinks that I am worth attacking. You know, that my own cells are attacking myself. And so that death is a really critical part in the kind of yin like medicine, earth-based medicine that we're talking about, or healing. And in the myth, I find it interesting that there's a lot of references to Asclepius, you know, preventing death, you know, sometimes at all costs, and it to such a successful level that Hades is upset that the natural process of souls coming into the underworld is being disrupted, really focusing on the kind of pushing against death in a way that's upsetting a natural order. And that for me, that I can feel that kind of reverberate up through the history of medicine, you know, to the point of now where we have a culture that I think everybody admits, MDs, everybody admits that we don't honor death that well. We don't honor the process of dying that well. And so I'm curious about that part. Yeah.
Yeah. Like it's not a part of the natural order of things. It's just to be avoided at all costs, as you say, at all costs. And there's some big costs sometimes. But Asclepius is an interesting figure when it comes to this, actually, because he takes people into the underworld very clearly with the abatons, you know, those processes that are underworld, especially with the snakes. And we can get right into talking about snakes and dogs, but snakes probably more so. But dogs are also a guide to the underworld. So the fact that his totem animals are dogs on the one hand, always considered to be guides to the underworld, and snakes, which have that slithering on the ground, shedding of skin, you know, everything we know and feel about snakes. And also there's a terror about snakes of like, you know, what actually would it be like in that abaton with non-venomous snakes, even though you know they're non-venomous, but they're still slithering all over you and around you all night. You know, I wonder how soundly you're sleeping inside of there, or are you hallucinating, and are there psychotropic medicines involved in this? We don't know those sorts of things. So for someone who's born, I always find his birth story, well, where is he born? He's born on the cusp of life and death, right? And that's where the physician lives. And Carl Karenyi writes about that. That's the physician spends his life there on the edge, whether that's bringing people in or helping people not go or taking people out. Basically, that's where the physician is. And then he takes it too far when a character by the name of Hippolytus is drawn and quartered, interestingly enough. So he's torn asunder, he's dismembered. And he's such a devout follower of Artemis that she comes to Asclepius and says, well, you know, this was very unfair. And I don't want Hippolytus, my dear follower, you know, especially for Artemis to have such a avid male follower is unique. And so she just didn't want to let go of him. And so comes to her nephew, Asclepius, and says, what can be done? And Asclepius he's been handed the blood of Medusa, you know, the left side of Medusa's blood will kill you and the right side will bring you back to life. And he's like, well, there is a way. You know, I mean, we know this even from horror movies and from, you know, thrillers and things. Like, there is a way. And yes, there's a way. But should he do it? And there's a sort of, we can spend some time there. Again, this is where we're heading towards the end of his life. Again, we're on the cusp of life and death, but we're going the other way. It's a bit like this 8th house, 9th house, and we can talk about that, the two ways to go around the chart. One, you could go the way the sun goes or the way the planets go, which we call diurnal, which is going that way. You can basically go 12, 11, 10 and follow it that way. Or you can go the way we're going on the podcast, we're starting at 1 and following the zodiacal. So we're going in that direction. But given that there are the two directions, you can go from the 8th to the 9th or the 9th to the 8th. And that cusp that we're on today, while we release this podcast, is that place of rebirth ultimately, or is it the gate to the underworld? Is it an entry point or an exit point to the underworld? Either way, Asclepius spends his whole existence hovering around this place, you know, being there, getting to know this place, what kills people, how to help them not be killed by those things. You know, what is the transition out of this life? Are there ways to prolong that inevitability, and then the promotion of a healthy life and a beautiful life, and one with lots of prana, lots of chi, lots of life force in it. You know, I mean, I'm always coming back to this line from Michael Meade that he shared on Vive's Summit, and I know a lot of people here ended up going and doing Vive's Summit and really enjoying it. But one thing he said, Michael Meade, in that is from an African proverb that says, when death finds me, may it find me alive. So there's that component of health too, like and that's why at these temples there's always a kind of Olympic-sized stadium to display what it is to be in epic health.
Can you say that statement again? Can you say this again?
Oh, the statement is, when death finds me, may it find me alive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. And thank you for coming back to it, because when I heard it in Vive's conversation with Michael Meade, I was like, oh, it's so important. It's like such an important statement. And that I've been hoping would come up in this 8th house process. So it's nice that it's come up in our conversation.
And it makes me think of all just the different ways of understanding death, and finding ways of allowing different kinds of death into the healing process, which is very, very 8th house. You referenced the vials of blood from Medusa, on the left side destroying death, and the right side kind of restoring life. With and again, with another friend, we were talking about this very thing, about left being that kind of sinister derivation as a left-handed person. And I've known that for a long time, that the left is sort of denigrated. You know, even my brother was one of the last people, not the last, but last generation of people in the US who wasn't allowed to write with his left hand. He was changed to his right hand, which you know, would happen for generations. And so the left being kind of like unwanted, pushed to the side. And this is not based on any kind of historical reference, but in just kind of an imagining of Medusa and these two different kinds of blood, and realizing also the left side could be that characterized as menstrual blood too, which is a blood of death. It's a blood of the uterine lining growing, ready to receive life. And then if that doesn't happen, that lining dies and is sloughed off and brought back down to the earth. So in that process, like, I mean, growing bone, for example, you know, there's just as much bone destruction as there is bone growth in order to keep our skeletons healthy. You know, and plants go through, you know, death in the fall in order to recreate, you know, seeds to regrow. And so I love that the 8th house, 9th house cusp part of part of this conversation. It's been really rich for me just thinking about that in the last couple of weeks in my practice, sitting kind of still with people in this place and seeing them go through kind of little processes of alchemical death and then coming out the other side. It reminds me much more of Demeter coming in through the underworld, and of course Persephone coming out the other side, versus what Demeter first tried to do with Demophon, that it was when she lost Persephone, was like, oh, I want to recreate what I had before. I want to fix this problem and go back to what I had before. And so I don't know. It could be off base, but to me, there are elements of this Asclepius evolution that are very deeply connected to the earth. And then there's this process that happens where I feel like that full alchemical separation and coming back together, it doesn't quite happen. And that's how we're left with where we are today in medicine. And there is a kind of recombining of all the parts of the story, the remembrance of the mother, the remembrance of the earth that may help. And I love your diurnal rotation piece too. But
one of the characters that actually spring to mind is the son of Asclepius, because he has the daughters Hygeia, Panacea, names that we know quite well. The hygiene and the cure-all of Panacea. He has this son who's like a dwarf figure, this little kind of pixie-like, very hermetic little character. His name is Telesphorus. And this character will appear upon completion of a process, which he sprang to mind then because one of the things I felt you speaking into is like, we need to be in the underworld until we don't need to be in there anymore. Yeah. That's the reality of it. Yeah, it's not like get out of here. You can't be in the underworld anymore. It's time, get out. It's like I got to be here, as you were saying, finding still points, finding the ability to sit with. In my solo episode, I tried to really like slow it down so we could experience that of like just wait a bit. And friend was like, I wish it was going on longer. It's like, yeah, I mean, that's the thing, that it needs to go longer in a way until, and the fact that the myths had this figure who, the fact that he's in the myths tells me that he showed up in people's psyches.
Yeah, nice.
Put it that way, or the other way around, whatever. But anyway, it's like Telesphorus shows up, and then if you report to the Asclepiad, I saw this little guy, and he was cheeky, kind of like hidden around a doorway, kind of looking at me. It's like, okay, we're complete here, because he comes at that completion. And even Jung, in his 75th birthday, he put Telesphorus in this figure that he made, or he made like a mandala but out of stone, I believe, and he put Telesphorus right in the middle there because he felt the completion was arriving in his life and his career, and he started to look towards the last passage, and there's pictures of this little guy that he's made, which is Telesphorus. So also that of well, when is it time? And the gods know that, or nature knows that, or our bodies know that, but our minds have no idea about that.
And it brings up to me the two ways of getting to meaning, which I think is, if we're coming in this zodiacal motion from the 8th house up to the 9th, we're looking for meaning, and that's what we're looking for, the reason, that in the medical discussion, that's why people go to the doctor. And but I love what you said about staying in the 8th until there's a process of completion, and doing that is really a personal, individual, body-based place instead of. And I think that's what this diurnal motion is too. It's the most obvious motion if you're standing on the earth, that the sun rises in the east and moves through the sky, sets in the west, goes somewhere, but disappears, perhaps to the earth, perhaps onto a boat, perhaps to fight a snake, perhaps burrowing its way through the mountains until it can reappear sort of magically on the other side.
Mm.
And 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 so that's like, to me, that feels like an intimate motion that is baked into our experience as humans. And then we have this other powerful that zodiacal motion that requires this understanding of the backdrop of the fixed stars, and requires really careful observation and learning and understanding, that the houses are named, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on this journey you've been going in, because as the earth rotates, the ascendant is moving through those houses in this powerful, metaphorical process of individuation, as you're really detailing in this journey. And that individuation, we're coming up out of the underworld. And what I'm feeling in a practice and feeling in these discussions, and this idea of like, how do we bring yin to yang, is that we're in this world of duality. We're in this world of light and dark is an actual force. It's not just the absence of light. And so sitting in the middle of those, and Jung talked about this too, like sitting in that place between the light and the dark, between the desire, the animal desire we have to get out of something that's uncomfortable, and instead just sitting in that space, is another way of getting to meaning. But it's a meaning that comes out of our own intuition, our own body's wisdom, as opposed to meaning being asserted from the outside. And I think both are important, both, just like the zodiacal motion and the diurnal motion, are really, really important. To me, it feels like the zodiacal motion is this maybe a little bit slower, steady, powerful, like I said, individuation process. And the diurnal motion of the sun going around is, perhaps it's more like the minute hand on a watch or something like that. And the two of them moving in these opposite ways is stabilizing to us. If you just have motion in one direction, it's going to create a kind of angular momentum that is very different from having a counterbalance that allows us to, perhaps be a little bit more stable. And I think it's that counterbalance that the eighth house allows. And if we're willing to stay there, and just feel that, in that of the setting of the sun, the plunging down to the earth, as the Vedics call the eighth house, and it can be, as Viv said in that fifth house episode, sitting in that place in between duality, like sitting with pain, sitting with anger, sitting with uncomfortable discomfort in your shoulder, can be joyful. It actually, if you stop trying to get out of something, it stops being suffering and becomes just an intense and can be a joyful experience. And it's also experience of self-love, like unconditional self-love, really just being with whatever is happening. And the eighth house, as this originally described as an idle place, is a place of death, but also idleness. I think there's a powerful opportunity there. And then you can rise into the ninth house, perhaps with two different kinds of meaning: an external meaning coming from wisdom that is developed, from our egoic, ability to kind of look more objectively at ourselves and say, hey, I think this is what's going on, and an internal knowing. And that's beautiful. To me, what the Coronis part of the story is asking us to do, kind of remembering.
Yeah, because in the end, we could follow her, and where does she go? Because if she is secretly an immortal, which you get the sense that she is, you get the sense that she's secretly a dark goddess, then she's not going to burn away on a funeral pyre, right? she's going to remain. In fact, the fact that Asclepius is even alive when she's on her funeral pyre suggests that she's alive, and suggests she's probably still alive somewhere in Thessaly, which is well worth going to Pelion and all those places to find her out there, or wherever your inner Thessaly might be, where the internal Coronis is still there. Coronis may even come through the world as a pandemic to let us know that she's around, for all that we know. A very similar named thing that happened in the world. There may be many ways that she lets herself be known that she's still about and around. But it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because the word stems to the crow, for sure, but also the coronation and the crowning. So there's a bit of a play going on with her name as well.
And a choosing of strength, too. That's something I keep going back to, because reading a little bit about
strength, yeah.
Mortal, like sort of this fulfilling of character almost, is like there's something about, and I hadn't thought about what you're saying about it. Yeah, she's still alive in the form of crows, alive in the form of us accessing our inner strength.
Yeah. The choice of mortality. She also chooses not the immortal, but the mortal. Perhaps as an immortal. We don't know, but all these kinds of tension points we'll find throughout myth. But I feel like we're sitting on this precipice of Asclepius's story, and I feel loath to not finish that story. So I'm just gonna go into that a little bit and see what images, and then we'll kind of find our way to a little wrapping up point. Not that it's so easy when you and I get talking, but that's fine. What are we going to do? So Asclepius does bring Hippolytus back from the dead, and then Hades makes a complaint. Obviously, he's lost one of his number down there, one of his souls. And of course, as happens with Sisyphus as well, it's the who chains up death. It's like, well, how's life going to work if we've stopped the dying process? You can't have one without the other. So Hades goes to his kind of upper world counterpart in Zeus and says, you must do something about this. And at which point Zeus sends the thunderbolt and kills Asclepius on the spot, incinerates him essentially. And that's the end of our Asclepius story ultimately. But it's not actually the end of our story. Now Apollo feels so betrayed by that he goes down into Tartarus and he kills the Cyclopses that created that thunderbolt in the first place. Then Zeus gets so angry about that, and I think it might even be Athena that has to step in and say, hey, this is going to keep going forever, so let's find a solution. And Apollo has to, in order for this story to sort of complete, not that myth ever does, as you well know, myth can't complete, otherwise it turns to stone. It must continue, so we all continue. So the punishment for Apollo is to be in servitude to a mortal, to a human, a cow herder, and through that year that he is the mortal slave, essentially, he's female in that time, or at least dresses female, and all of the cows that he cares for have twins in that year. Isn't that a curious little...
Yes, that is a little
set of images.
A duality piece.
Yeah, but it's almost like, okay, well, how are we going to resolve this? We need to go back to the cows. So we go back to the essential feminine in Taurus, and, we go back to the beginning of earth signs and the Taurian principle, which starts the earth over again. The feminine principle is back in that Apollo is now feminine and essentially midwifing twins through. So it's Taurus into Gemini and sort of beginning that process again.
Right. And that Taurus into Gemini cusp is the other gate of Hades.
Second and third house. Yeah. Maybe just what we can describe that to the audience to just reference that. Yeah.
Yeah. I hope that's not confusing, but as you imagine the sun going through the sky, the first gate of Hades is as the sun gets into the late afternoon and descends from the ninth into the eighth house. And there's this movement, is sort of an accelerating movement towards the horizon and towards the night. And then the sun undergoes the nighttime journey, the nocturnal journey through night consciousness and a deeper kind of relatedness, and then passing the IC, passing through the fourth house, passing through the third, and the cusp of the second and third house is a direct line across from the cusp of the ninth and the eighth. And so the ancients thought of that as the gate of Hades, as the sun's starting to come out of the underworld into the second house, and resourcing, gathering resources as the energy of the day is approaching, and are coming from that second house with hopefully some different kind of resourcing that than they had at the end of the day on the other side, having gone through, all this eighth house energy that we're talking about, and through this deep sense of relatedness, and all the way through the night and getting ready to come back into the day.
Which is, retrieving the internal sun that can match the external sun, isn't it? This is Apollo, maybe in his place in these myths, is to retrieve the inner sun, the dark sun, maybe the Coronis, that is the match for the Apollo. And then these twins are sort of like a part of that.
And there's in that story the part of maybe perhaps there's some of the staying in the eighth house, and really the alchemical process in a person is really becoming more whole and becoming more related to all the different parts of oneself. And what I see in my practice is, as that happens, we become more related to all of the external relationships we have with plants and nature, and this sort of expanded, more powerful sense of self. And I think there's a real lesson in that that can be conceptualized by that energy of diurnal movement from the eighth and plunging back down into the earth in the seventh, with that angle being all about relatedness, and opposite the ascendant, which is sometimes considered sort of, it's our sense of self, it's how we're moving through the world, but it's also sometimes referred to as a mask, and that there may be some real power in loosening sometimes some of that ascendant coheringness, letting parts of that die, and allowing a greater relatedness to the dark parts of ourselves and the dark parts of our world. And to me, this knowing that I was going to have this conversation with you and thinking more in depth about this cusp of the eighth and ninth, and if Asclepius, if what I'm saying is staying in the eighth house is a form of healthcare, which is a question I really have been sinking into and working with professionally, then what is this teaching us about healthcare? What is Asclepius and Coronis, and Apollo and Chiron, what are they teaching us about how we can be more maybe holistic with our healthcare? And there's something that I'm really curious about in terms of that moving to the descendant and the related, expanding our relatedness, getting out of our individual, like, oh, this is who I am and this is who I always want to be, and can you just make me young again like I used to be, and instead surrendering to this process of disassembling and then reassembling or reweaving, reimagining, so that when we can come out of the eighth up into that ninth house of meaning, which is a much richer, more complex, deeper sense of sun,
and relatedness, as is the word there, and that is the ultimate eighth house word, really, at the deepest level, because it's that deep intimacy, right? It's that understanding that I really am a part of everything, and that's not just a cliche. That can be a cliche, but then it can also be a deeply felt experience. And then when you come out of that, and this is like the return in Eleusis, is to be more alive because you've been with the death, right? You've been in the death, and therefore you're more alive, and
that requires all of us. Then it's been a lot of lessons on my end and learning from. It's the joyful part of my practice is, like you said with your biodynamic craniosacral, like I'm not sure what's going to happen when I go and I start these. When I sit with somebody, I don't know what's going to happen, but we know that we will find a starting place and we'll sit there and see where it takes us. And where that has taken me in my practice is to different parts of us and parts of me and parts of my clients and parts of the ability that we have to sit there that is much more powerful than I ever would have imagined. And it involves connecting not just the heart, that bright, cohering fire in our bodies, but also the underworld fire. Chinese medicine is such a model for us in terms of a cohesive system, yin and yang, and also this lower burner idea that they have, that there is a fire in our pelvis. There's a place of holding that is important to bring together, this underworld part of us, very Scorpio, or eighth house, sexual power, creative power, individual power that can be matched or paired with the heart and rising into relatedness, and then also rising into the place of meaning. And this is something I've learned from my illness. Requires all of those dynamics, I think, but they're accessible by inside every one of us, and they're not. Unfortunately, it requires some practice and training most of the time now, because we're not taught how to just be with ourselves culturally. But by sitting with nature and sitting with plants and their underworld and overworld beingness, we connect with that part of ourselves.
Yeah, and it's making me think of money and debt being the same root word as sin, and forgiveness, and this kind of health being ultimately free, although there's a lot to learn on the way. But ultimately free and freeing.
Not like free.
Yeah.
In many different ways. Yeah.
And with that, I feel Telesphorus, I just see him over there in the corner, so he has arrived to let us know.
I remember Telesphorus. I like this. I'm gonna watch out for Telesphorus.
Watch out for him. He shows up. He does show up. Yeah, and he's
Does
fun.
He come right at the end of 45-minute increments? Like, does he match my calendar?
Yeah, he does.
Practice?
Yeah, but you can see him as a hermetic figure, also as a guide to bring you out, right? I mean, he's Hermes yet again,
What I mean.
And he's bringing you out at the 8th, and he's like, "Let's go. It's time to go back now." Or maybe as you guys, you and Jason and the Hermes Hestia Center, he comes back to get you from Hestia, the hearth, and brings you back into the world. And it's like, okay, let's go. Let's get ready to get up to that MC now, and make your place in the world. And that's also really important. Can't stay here all the time in the 8th. It's like, that's just for this time. Then you got to move through the 9th to understand what the hell just happened, which could lead you into the MC or the midheaven, that apex place of your chart, to see like, well, what does my soul in this incarnation, in this lifetime, want to be for the world? And that's the great journey of the wheel, isn't it? That it has this peak point of the midheaven of like, this is who I am.
Understand what the hell just happened. I like that. What this place in hell just happened.
Yeah. Indeed.
But you're right. We don't want to be stuck there. We want to come back out. And,
it's just super important, because there can also be an addictive style process of continuing to go back again and again and again to the underworld. And Telesphorus is like, no. Hermes is like, no, bring that out now. Bring that up and out, and then there's a world here, right? That's beyond this world, and that is so inwardly focused. And if we can get more and more, and this is another Michael Meade, talks about this a lot, of the genius, And if we can get more and more of those geniuses activated in the eighth, but then brought through the ninth and sent out into the midheaven, then the world becomes just a tiny bit more beautiful with each soul who becomes actualized in that midheaven sort of a way. A little bit more beautiful with everyone, and that's where meaning is really, I think.
Yeah, I like that. And the breath. And we don't want to spend all of our time in the underworld, but the practice can allow us to incorporate the inner and outer, of the earth, just like the breath, and it can become as easy and as joyful as the breath too.
Beautiful. Well, Travis, on behalf of myself and the audience, thank you so much for coming and hanging out on this particular juicy cusp. And you know what timing to have this conversation and be able to release it as we stand on the threshold of Scorpio and Sagittarius, which means constellations wise, we're in the realm of Ophiuchus right now. And thank you for bringing Asclepius alive, who has been on the podcast a few times, referenced and talked about and talked from and talked through a lot. The patron demigod of On the Soul's Terms. So really happy to have you here and elaborating and amplifying and helping us find our way in and
Thank
out.
you, Chris. It's been an honor and been a really fertile opportunity for wrestling with these ideas, and it's nice to be in dialogue about them rather than just in my own head. So
Amazing. And if people want to find you, Travis, what should they type into the AI search engines?
Travis J. Elliott works pretty well. I have a newly resurgent. I'm going to try and resurge my Instagram. Travis J. Elliott ND, but just travisjelliott.com. My practice is entirely remote, which has been a joy actually to be able to connect places that are not just hyper local. And I'm just really passionate about helping create a structure for allowing people to use symptoms as transformation, and a deeper understanding, a way of sourcing their own connection to self and intuition, rather than just, a pattern. And use astrology. I use these alchemical plant medicines that have been great partners, and myth and in intuition. And I'm always looking to learn.
Amazing.
It's always evolving.
Amazing. And teach. Well, thank you so much, Travis. And thanks for joining us. And thanks everybody for listening. And obviously I'll leave in the show notes, I will also leave Travis's details so you can click on that. And I guess we'll have an Instagram post which we'll collaborate on. So there's ways to find him and find out more about his work. And I really encourage that, and just to strike up some conversation in this area. And
I love conversation.
Yeah, and hopefully there's been things stirring in people that can be really helpful in their own process of, ultimately being with the cycles of life, I would say.
Yeah. Thank you, Chris. Thank you for creating this space. It's it's a wonderful one for everybody listening, and appreciate it. It's an honor to be here.
Well, it's a pleasure, and it was great to have you on the show, Travis. We'll see you again another time. Thank you for listening to On the Soul's Terms podcast. To support the show, please consider leaving a 5-star review, sharing with friends, or becoming a patron at patreon.com/onthesoulsterms. Until next time. be like a little postscript. Okay, go on.
So I have a surprise plant story for you, Chris.
Yeah, I'm going to put this after the credits.
Do you know the plant that's named after Asclepius?
I do not.
It's milkweed. Are you familiar with milkweed?
No, I don't know what that is.
Milkweed is a plant of many different native species, exists all over the world, and it is best known as being an obligate symbiotic partner with the monarch butterfly. You know, the monarch butterfly being the migratory butterflies, orange and black, that will travel thousands of miles. And they're actually, because of different shifting migratory patterns, they're in Australia now too, I think. And milkweed is a plant that grows natively around here and natively in a lot of different places in the world. And the monarch butterfly requires milkweed to lay its eggs and to raise its young. And the milkweed hasn't really known that well herbalism wise, but Carl Linnaeus, who did all the taxonomical classifications in Latin of all the plants, and who was actually has a kind of an Asclepius connection himself, knew that there was a native tradition of using milkweed as medicine, and so named milkweed Asclepius.
Wow.
And it turns out that the caterpillars of the monarch butterfly need to be hatched on milkweed and eat the milkweed leaves, and in that will gain some of the toxic sap that milkweed produces. And it's a white liquid, hence the milkweed name. It's a white liquid that has a cardiac glycosides, these kind of toxic to the heart chemicals, that as the caterpillar grows into a butterfly, then makes the monarch butterfly poisonous to lots of different animals and birds, and therefore protects the monarch butterfly as it travels these thousands of miles and to its breeding grounds, in the south from the north. And so there's this mother milkweed piece of the caterpillars having to be raised on this white liquid that helps their own. It protects them, just like mother's milk does. And it gets crazier because it turns out that different native species of milkweed have different levels of these cardiac glycosides, and we're told we want milkweed in our yards up here in the north because we want the monarchs to have places to lay their eggs. But a mother monarch, has the ability to detect parasite loads within themselves, and therefore what the parasite loads will be in their eggs and their young. And actually, we've researched this, not me, but the research has shown that the mother monarch will choose, if she has a choice, will choose the milkweed species in the area that has the right amount of cardiac glycosides in its milky sap, because too much and it'll retard the growth of the caterpillar. Too little and these parasites will be damaging to the growth of the caterpillar. So we can actually select and choose the right amount of this milkweed milk to protect her children.
Unbelievable.
And going a little bit further into it, I discovered that the migration of the monarch butterfly to Mexico, which is one of the main migratory routes historically, and monarch migration is considered a bellwether sort of health marker that ecologists will look at to see about the health, going back to the Asclepius plant and monarch, the health of the wider biomes in ecology can be monitored via monarch populations. And the monarchs have been incorporated into the Mexican culture, specifically because their migration each year is coincidentally at the same time as, do you know the famous Mexican holiday that is tied into our 8th house discussion?
No.
The Day of the Dead.
Oh, right, of course.
So the return of the monarchs each year is integrated and woven into the Day of the Dead celebrations.
Oh my God! Wow.
The orange is a big color for the Day of the Dead, partly because of this historical connection with the monarch butterfly, which is a connection to the Asclepius plant that is deeply tied into a kind of mothering that plant does.
Fascinating.
Very real way. Well, anyway, I just thought it was kind of fun.
There you go. That is an amazing postscript for those who decided to listen on beyond the credits. This is my own version of a Marvel post-credit scene.
Awesome.
So thank you
for humoring me and the plant.
Special edition. That's incredible. And this just shows how interconnected and interwoven everything truly is. And little anecdotes like that help us remember all of that and not be isolated units or pretend that we are on this big, broad, complex planet.
Well said.